Good morning. My name is Kieren. I'm the faculty lead for MITHIC. I want to extend a welcome to everyone online watching this as well. Thank you so much, Rick and Augustine, for that important conversation, which I think will resonate throughout the day. So we have 4 sessions today, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about the structure of them, and then I'm going to disappear. So I will come up, introduce the session. We then will have 2 presentations of research that was supported by MITHIC. A moderator will join the presenters on stage to lead a conversation looking for common themes. And then I'll return to stage and I'll be here to moderate questions and answers from the audience. So as you hear these presentations, do think about the questions you may have. So our first session is on 2 education initiatives supported by MITHIC. And I noticed that we have a parallel to our first session in that we had Augustine, a philosopher, and Rick, a political scientist. We now have Kieren Setiya, a philosopher, and Lily Tsai, a political scientist, talking about their work. So they'll be joined by Melissa Nobles, our Chancellor, to moderate the conversation. But first, let's start with Kieren.
Thank you so much. Well, as is appropriate for a presentation about great books, this is going to be very low tech. This is the only slide I have. It will be almost entirely papyrus-based. Now, what we're calling a Great Books Initiative at MIT is, so far, a sequence of 2 subjects, classics of Western philosophy offered in the fall, and ancient authors offered by literature in the spring. The courses are loosely integrated. They have common themes. There's minimal overlap. So it would make sense for a student to take both, which we're going to encourage. They don't have a unified set curriculum of great books. And in each case, the subjects were ones we were really keen to teach, but unable to staff reliably without donor-directed funds. So we have a 3-year pilot right now, for which we're extremely grateful to Race Data and Analog Devices. So why were we excited about teaching great books? And what does it mean to talk in those terms? There are grounds for skepticism. So great books courses, programs, and colleges are an artifact of the first half of the 20th century, beginning with John Erskine's General Honors at Columbia in 1920. It was discontinued in 1928, but then revived and revamped as Literature Humanities in 1937. Meanwhile, Columbia defector Mortimer Adler left for Chicago in 1930, and that took up the mantle of great books education. And then another landmark was St. John's College in Annapolis. It was the first college devoted to a great books curriculum in 1937. If you flash forward to the present, programs like these are notable for their relative absence. And they've come to be associated with political conservatism, and those who advocate for great books with a reactionary narrative that has sort of 3 parts that I want to talk about. So one is an idea that the Western canon reflects the key ideas, democracy, liberalism, maybe the scientific method of something called Western civilization. Second idea is that academics enamored of feminism, post-colonialism, and multiculturalism dismantled this canon in the 1980s and 1990s. And the third idea is that the predictable result of this was the decline of the humanities, which had betrayed their cultural inheritance. Now, every element of that narrative is misleading. In an essay on Western civilization that I encourage you to read, it's published in The Guardian, Kwame Anthony Appiah argues that there's really no such thing. Now, he begins with a probably apocryphal anecdote, but I'm going to repeat it anyway, which is that when he was asked what he thought of Western civilization, Mahatma Gandhi is said to have replied, "I think it would be a very good idea." But where Gandhi implies that the West was never truly civilized, Appiah goes one step further, suggests that Western civilization is a bad idea, intellectually. It distorts our understanding of history, in part because the meaning of the West is so wildly indeterminate, first drawing a contrast with the Islamic world, later with the Orient, and then in the Cold War, a contrast with the other side of the Iron Curtain, more recently part of a more complicated contrast with the global South. If we go back to the root, Christianity versus Islam, we find religious conflict, but intellectual common ground. So the fathers of Western philosophy, Plato and Aristotle, had their works preserved by scholars in the Arab world. And Muslim, Jewish, and Christian thinkers, Averroes or Ibn Rushd, Maimonides, Aquinas, all did the same thing of synthesizing Aristotle with their different monotheisms in the 12th and 13th centuries. They were all humming the same tune. The idea of the West as a distinctive heritage seems to be an invention of the 1890s, and then it gets transformed through the Cold War. But actual intellectual continuity with Aquinas, let alone Plato, is very minimal, as slogans about liberalism and democracy attest. Neither Plato nor Aquinas was a fan of either. What about the university? Did woke academics undermine the Western canon, the Great Books course, and with it, their own enrollments? Not really. It's true that the canon was, I think, rightly questioned and expanded by academics. Insofar as inclusion in the canon is a function of influence, it tracks social and political power and the injustice with which that power has been exercised. But courses like Erskine's and Adler's were still being offered, if somewhat revised and less commonly required. And humanities enrollments actually peaked in the 1990s. So whatever was going on, students were not put off by it. Enrollments fell and continued to fall, not because of woke, but due to external pressures, the soaring cost of higher education, increasing competition for desirable jobs, the mistaken sense that humanities graduates are not employable, and a consequent push to tailor education more directly to the needs of labor markets. MIT is in a special position with respect to this in many ways. One is that the issue of enrollment is kind of less relevant because the supply of students in SHASS subjects is relatively fixed. There was no bubble at MIT. Okay, so if the conservative narrative doesn't hold up, what reason do we have to revitalize the Great Books course? The short answer is because there is an urgent need for students to grapple with expansive questions about human nature, human knowledge, ethics, society, and politics. When change is rapid and unpredictable, like the unfolding climate crisis and the socially disruptive impact of AI, we need the wider horizons, imagination, and creative insight fostered by close engagement with great books more than ever. Now, we know from enrollment numbers that when we're able to offer classics of Western philosophy consistently, students want to take it. The class size has doubled over the last 3 years. So we're not proposing new requirements, we're proposing courses that we believe students are excited to take. I'll focus on Western philosophy, which I think, unlike Western civilization, does name something blurrily coherent, if rather porous. Is a concession to what we're best equipped to teach that goes along with self-awareness about the limits of that tradition and acknowledgement of its indebtedness to others. But given sufficient resources, there's a world in which SHASS could offer a range of subjects across geographic and cultural borders that would introduce students to far-reaching questions about humanity through other texts and traditions flagged as Great Books courses. What exactly is the value for students of spending time with these books? It's not to to absorb a fixed body of established wisdom. It's to learn to think for themselves with the help of living documents that give historical perspective and repay close study. We sometimes argue for the humanities and social sciences at MIT as sources of knowledge and understanding of culture and history, society and social change, ethics and politics that will make students better people and better citizens. We're not just preparing MIT students to land high-paying jobs, but to solve human problems, and so to make the world a better place. SHASS contributes to this, and Great Books courses can play an important role. But if all we're doing is creating well-intentioned problem solvers, we're missing something vital. I'm reminded of a quip that was attributed to the poet W.H. Auden, who put words in the mouth of the social worker. Quote, "We are all here on earth to help others. What on earth the others are here for, I don't know." If the best we can hope for is to solve problems we'd be better off not having to face, why bother to live at all? In the original meaning, liberal arts were understood in opposition to servile arts or vocational skills. Liberal education was fit for a free individual working out their own conception of how to live, including the positive goods that make life worth living in the first place. Art, music and literature, love and friendship, the beauty of scientific and mathematical understanding. Reading profound works of literature and philosophy, history and anthropology can help us to do this. Of course, you could still ask whether we need to examine our own lives in order to live fulfilling ones. Maybe the unexamined life can be worth living. But unless you've examined that question, as you would in classics of Western philosophy, I'm afraid you're in no position to say. Thank you very much. And I'd like to introduce Lily Tsai to the stage.
Sometimes the world can feel a little crazy. That's because things are changing fast, really fast. It turns out, though, that what we need to do is not to move fast with it, but to stop and reflect and think. What kind of world do we really want to build so that we're not constantly overwhelmed by complexity and chaos and noise? MIT was originally built to support an industrial society, one that was based on machines and manufacturing. Now we're transforming ourselves for a digital age, one with AI and computing and synthetic biology, and all of these things are just making change faster. More than ever, we need to have moral, intellectual, and aesthetic judgment. These are the things that AI cannot replace. Don't get me wrong, some of my own research is on designing AI for democracy. But AI can't tell us if something is beautiful. It can't tell us what a good idea is. And it definitely can't tell us what is right and what is wrong. But if we're not paying attention, we're going to fall into believing that AI can substitute for these judgments. So we need to prepare our students to reason for themselves about hard human questions, so they can work together to build the social fabric and civic infrastructure that we need for the future. Compass teaches students to build for the common good based on clear principles and values, investigated with rigorous tools from the humanities, arts, and social sciences. The first thing that we've done in the Compass Initiative is to design a class with the input of 31 faculty and 30 students from 22 departments. It's truly a team effort, and many people, including Kieren, who I think joined for our very first organizational meeting, and Susan Silby, and I'll call out also Rebecca Sachs, and especially Emily Richmond-Pollock, Adam Albright, and Leila Fredland. But it's truly a team effort from the Institute, across the Institute, and it wouldn't be possible without all of these people to have all of Compass's multiple facets. Compass gets students to grapple with hard human questions and to read what great thinkers have said about these questions. It teaches students to debate, not in order to win, but in order to listen and understand. Most importantly, we teach students to apply all of this to the rapidly changing world around us. Here's an example. We start in the first week by reflecting on what holds communities together. We read the US Constitution and the Mayflower Compact and the MIT Values Statement. Then we discuss how great philosophers like Thomas Hobbes and John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau have answered the question of how we can have liberty and individual freedom, yet still be constrained to obey the laws and rules of our communities. After this, we get students to apply what they've learned by collaborating to write a class compact together. You can see a copy of one of these with the student signatures on the bottom. So each week follows this basic pattern. Students read great thinkers, they debate and deliberate on a fundamental question about human existence, and then they apply it to a real-world problem. We're hopefully remaking a liberal arts for the digital age, but that's a talk for another day. In Compass, we investigate 3 big questions, and we keep coming back to them. What do we value, and why? What do we know, and how do we know it? And what do we owe to each other? What is the kind of world that we want to build together? After discussing John Stuart Mill and Immanuel Kant, virtue ethicists like Aristotle and Confucius, we map our personal values and we figure out whether or not our professional values in our fields reflect that. We read Dante and Shakespeare. This semester, we took students to Verdi's Macbeth opera and Beethoven's Seventh Symphony, and we asked them to reflect on the value of aesthetic and artistic experience and expression. By the end of the semester, Compass students have started to surface the structure and principles of history, politics, science, poetry, and music. This focus on reasoning about hard human questions using rigorous tools from the many disciplines in the humanities, arts, and social sciences is the essence of Compass's unique approach. Let me show you what I mean. True or false? MIT is a meritocracy. If you ask a room full of MIT students this question, many, probably even most, of them say true. But why? What does it mean to be a meritocracy? What is merit even? Is mathematical ability merit? Is hard work merit? And how would one value these things in the context of a university? And how do we know someone's merit? Do we measure it with problem sets and tests? Or do we figure it out some other way? And once we know what we value as merit and how we know something is meritorious, what do we owe to those who have merit in this context and those who do not? So you can see how a simple knee-jerk true-false response quickly unspools into a long string of difficult questions. These kinds of questions need the different disciplines of philosophy, political science, anthropology, and history in order to know how to reason about how we should answer them. You might ask, why does it matter if we can reason more rigorously about these kinds of questions? Well, one, it helps us diagnose disagreements. If 2 people disagree about whether or not MIT is a meritocracy, is it because they disagree about the values or because they don't agree about the facts on the ground? Breaking down the question allows us to figure out the points of agreement and maybe uncertainty, and to be clear about what we do disagree about. 2, it invites us to be more reflective and intentional about our own beliefs. If we think math skills are meritorious, are there other kinds of merit that we should prioritize just as much based on the same logic? Finally, it helps us take action. If we're in a position of power, what kinds of decisions would accomplish the rewarding of merit? MIT students need to be fluent in reasoning about answers to these hard human questions. Some of them will become engineers, and they'll need to know the values and impacts of the systems they design. Some will become parents or educators, and they'll need to know what to reward and why. Many of them will become leaders, and they'll have to make policies and decisions that influence institutional and societal structures. And all, we hope, will face disagreements about hard questions with respect and humility and tools for understanding differences. The multidisciplinarity of Compass gives people all the puzzle pieces together at one table to understand what are the multi-systemic challenges of the digital era. I don't know of any other place where an approach this deep and complex is happening. Even though we've just started piloting it, people and communities are asking us to build a version of Compass for them. And I get why. Students have been writing in their anonymous feedback cards things like, "I wish classes were longer." Those of you who are students and faculty know this doesn't always happen. You can see one student has written on their index card something like, "Banger class, absolute cinema." And I actually don't know what that means, but I think it's positive. Some of the professors who teach Compass, and some of you are here today, are doing this beyond our regular course load. That's how much it means to us. Compass aims to give people the habits, tools, knowledge, and capacity to act from their own most fundamental commitments. And people are really craving this capacity. We all know that MIT has always existed to do good for the nation and the public. And we're not just educating technical leaders, we're also educating citizens, civic leaders, and whole human beings that will be functioning in the digital age. At Compass, our mission is to help students see themselves that way so they leave ready to build, both for the joy of it and for the greater good of it. Thank you. So I'll now be joined by Chancellor Nobles and Kieren Setiya for the panel part of the discussion.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah. Great. Well, this is terrific. Thank you. I'm Melissa Nobles, I already said, but they told me I had to reintroduce myself. So I have a few questions to start. I think we're going to go about 15 minutes with questions, and then we're going to have questions from the audience. I'll begin. And the first, I'm going to start with you, Kieren. So I was reading yesterday. It's kind of connected to what you were saying, but from a different angle. So in the Chronicle of Higher Education, Danielle Allen at Harvard wrote a piece about returning to the classics in the age of AI. And I thought, okay, this is for you.
Okay.
And so she said that part of the challenge, and I think we heard it this morning, is that AI is, as she says, a part of the story, but not the only part of what ails us. That we live in an era where capital-intensive tech companies are fracking our attention with addictive algorithms designed to force every bit of our attention to the surface for monetization, for advertising revenue. So she goes on, but the point is that young people are beset by an epidemic of anxiety and distraction. She claims that returning to the classics will help cure that addiction. What say you?
I think it's both a challenge and this is the MIT response, and a huge opportunity. So yeah, I think one of the things about reading Plato or Margaret Cavendish, who's a kind of early modern philosopher who wrote the first science fiction, these books are hard. And they're often very alien. I mean, we think of the idea of the Western tradition sort of suggests familiarity, but actually the strangeness of these books and the demandingness of them is central to why they're interesting and worth engaging with. So I think one of the things that's very hard in teaching classics of Western philosophy or any kind of great books course is that part of the pedagogical goal is teaching students how to read. Like, how do you read something long and sustained? And we think of that self-consciously. Like, so part of the task part of the curriculum is, how do you read a book that you're not going to understand first time, a book that is extremely challenging, and how do you create space in which students have the leisure and luxury to do that, and the incentive to do that, because they'll be part of a conversation in which they're accountable for having done it, but also get to share their reactions with others. And I will say, I think the goal, this is aspirational, but I think it's not unrealistic, is what we want to do is not just to create students who can read difficult books, it's students who want to read them. There's this wonderful formulation from the critic Gayatri Spivak, who describes humanities education as the non-coercive rearrangement of desire. And I love that formulation. What we want is students to leave a course like this wanting to continue reading difficult books, engage with difficult ideas. And then there's a further challenge for academics like me, which is we have to then write the books that they can read, that's another story. But I think it can be this can be a venue for tackling that problem if we're self-conscious about it.
Right. I'm going to be a bit provocative. So you can imagine a student saying, I mean, when we were growing up back in the day, it was Cliff Notes.
Yeah.
What would make a student not think about that again? Even if they're open to the challenges you're describing, and I have no doubt that students will be open to it. But how would you, I'm asking you to think in the future, of course, kind of manage that in a way that kind of deals with the current reality and still gets at what you described, which I would agree is very important, right?
I mean, I think there's two sides to that. One is sort of classroom management, like how do you deter students from taking shortcuts that will impede their education. And there are sort of things you can do in the class in terms of testing or setting up classroom settings in which they're writing without access to AI and so on. The other part of it, I think, is about modeling. I mean, one thing about teaching a course in which you read Plato or Margaret Cavendish is that going back to those texts is energizing for the teacher. Like you find something new every time. And modeling to them that I've been doing this for 25 years, but I need to read this again because I'm going to see new things, is a way of showing them that what you get if you ask AI to summarize this is not the thing itself, and that sort of hopefully sharing that excitement and novelty of actually engaging with the richness of the original text is something we can do in the class. So I think it's a mixture of thinking about strategies for managing the classroom that limit access or limit the incentives, and partly really just trying to make the case by example that there's a kind of intellectual excitement that the teachers get and that they can share that would just not be available if what they were dealing with was ChatGPT. Could you summarize Plato's Republic?
Maybe I could share something.
Yes, please. I was going to ask you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I mean, it's actually really funny because I was actually at Harvard a couple of weeks ago at a workshop that Daniel Allen organized on trying to design something like Compass at Harvard. And one of the things we talked about was actually something that came up, I think, in the conversation between Dean Ryo and Dean Locke earlier about meeting students where they are. And so it is true, like attention has been fracked, actually. And I think that that's just an empirical reality that we have to adjust our pedagogy in order to accommodate. And so one of the things that we've tried out in Compass to greatest success is actually getting the students in the classroom to do a table read of Shakespeare's Macbeth from front to back. So we sat in a room for 3 hours, and a group of us read Macbeth together. This is actually a little bit like something I think colleagues at Virginia Tech are doing, where they have a class that's 8 hours long. For the first 6 hours, you sit in a room and you read together. And then the last 2 hours, you discuss what you've read. And it's incredibly popular, apparently. So, I think this is actually an opportunity for us to become really, really creative about pedagogy. Another thing that I think is interesting is that students, as Kieren is saying, want to be held accountable, actually, for doing difficult things. I mean, MIT students love to do the most difficult things. And so when we got them to debate and deliberate about the kind of class constitution they wanted to write for themselves this semester, a lot of them actually said, we want to be held accountable for our reading. And so, luckily we had actually already instituted reading quizzes, and so they were like, that's great. That can be, an implicit part of the class compact. So I think there's a hunger for it, actually. As Kieren is saying, like it's getting students who want to do difficult things, who want to grapple with difficult ideas. And this is exactly what MIT students are so like special at.
Yeah, I will say just briefly to follow up, just in a total agreement with that, like one thing we're extraordinarily lucky at with an MIT is the students are totally wonderful. And my experience of the AI opportunities is it sort of save us from ourselves is often their attitude. Like it's a collective action problem. They don't want to take shortcuts, but the temptation is there. And so I think they will collaborate with initiatives in the classroom to make the experience more intellectually satisfying.
Right, so in a way, both of you are describing a place where the classroom is becoming a safe space of sorts. I mean, a different kind of space, a space where time is differently experienced.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And, I think it's so interesting to watch students in Compass because they really relish this time together. It's a space where it's safe, I suppose, but what's more interesting is that it's a place where they can be free. It's like a space where they can freely discuss and debate things with each other and build relationships and a sense of community around, kind of these fundamental questions that will, frankly, all of us will struggle with our entire life.
So space, just to clarify, meant, yes, safe from devices or from the attention, the kind of the siren call of those.
The devices.
Of the devices.
Yes, absolutely.
So Lily, thinking about the Compass class, one of the things I thought, first, it's just amazing. I read the report, it's something, right? To see the levels of engagement of both faculty and students. And the readouts of the student reports were really quite positive. But one of the things you wonder about is what lessons is impossible to know, but I imagine all of us are wondering. So what happens after that, right? So you take this great class, and there are some things that are stirred within, presumably, and the students take that forward. Are there ways of figuring out how students are bringing those things forward? Are they becoming evangelists of sorts? Are they perhaps expressing more interest in taking SHASS and other kinds of courses, non-technical courses as a consequence? I imagine that would be our expectation and hope. But I'd be curious to know, I know it's pretty early on, so I'm asking prematurely, but I wonder if you have any views about that.
Yeah, when we started Compass, again, also with the help and support of Race Data, one of the things that we really committed to was actually making this a learning experience for the faculty. And part of that is actually making sure that we're following students in their journey through MIT over 4 years and seeing what they're bringing from Compass through that journey. And so, one of the things that we've asked students is, are you more likely to take a class in, or what disciplines are you more likely to take a class in that you wouldn't have actually known about before? And so we have data on things like, are they taking linguistics, or are they taking philosophy, or are they taking anthropology and sociology? So that's one way in which we're hopefully learning about how Compass affects their journey. The second thing that's been interesting is that people seem to want something like Compass. They want an opportunity to grapple with great books and great thinkers and these fundamental questions at inflection points in their life, right? So we've had second semester seniors ask if we could have a Compass version just for that, because they're just about to go out into the real world and they want kind of a time to think about those questions. Somebody from Sloan's executive MBA program actually asked if we could do something for 40-year-old, mid-career MBAs, because they too have had 20 years of professional success, and they're kind of wondering what they want their legacy to be. And so that's been really interesting. Finally, we're also like Concourse, which is another fantastic program at MIT that has many of the same goals that Kieren and I have. We've learned from Concourse, that one way to continue this journey with these questions and great thinkers is to involve Compass alumni in becoming TAs for Compass. Because there is this kind of, Esther, I didn't even see you here. Esther Duflo is also part of the Compass team. One of the great ways of solidifying things is that kind of thing that you hear from medicine, you see one, do one, teach one. And at MIT, we've figured out learning by doing is incredibly important, but this is also a way of getting them to learn by teaching.
Well, that's terrific. I have just a couple of minutes left before we turn to the audience. So, when I talk a lot about as Chancellor about the whole student, and a big part of that is the classroom, but another part of it is outside of the classroom. So which is part of the reason why I was asking. Both of your descriptions of your classes are, it sounds at the end, a commitment to making our students just better people, right? Kind of, so it's as much a story of inviting self-examination as it is kind of imparting, screaming at students, but more kind of stirring the self-learning. As both professors, how has it affected you? I mean, because here's the challenge, is that we may have all taken these classes when we were in college, but we came of age at a different time. So how do you kind of meet students where they are, but also recognize that we all are being changed by our current moment? Do these classes help you?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been amazing. I think part of the reason the faculty on the campus teaching teams and design teams are willing to put all of this effort above and beyond their regular teaching loads is because we're all learning from each other. And it's really like a master class in learning, and I actually wish, there were more opportunities at MIT to do something like this because, all of us are kind of learning from Esther. Like, when do you get to take a little mini class from Nobel Prize winning economists, right? Or Sally Haslanger and Alex Byrne, these are like amazing philosophers, and you get to sit there, I'm a political scientist, and you get to sit there and like hear what these philosophers think about kind of cutting edge thinking. So I think that's been intellectually enriching, and I think, we also try to have Compass co-taught by professors from different disciplines, and both for the teachers and for the students, watching that kind of interdisciplinary conversation is just, it's a very rare experience. And it models kind of the interdisciplinary collaboration and debate that we need, again, to address these kinds of challenges that are going to be multi-systemic. You have to have people who are able to translate across disciplines and figure out where the synergies can be, and we're hoping to like kind of model that. Yes.
Just to add, the only thing I would add to that, which I totally agree with, is there's also just learning from the students. So one thing about manifesting the freshness of going back to a text you've read many times is that the students will notice things that you didn't notice. And I think it's really exhilarating for a student in a class to make an argument and have the professor go, I never thought of it that way.
You're a genius.
And I think that I learn a huge amount from the students in more or less every class I teach at MIT. But I think that's one way in which they can come to see that they're part of a conversation that they wouldn't get if they took the kind of shortcuts.
Thank you. So it's time for the audience. I've asked my questions. There are roving mics, I think.
That's right. First question over there in the back.
Hi, thank you very much. This is wonderful and exciting and encouraging. I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit more about, you both mentioned great books and great thinkers, and I'm just wondering if you could say a little bit more about what makes a book great, what makes a thinker great. Thank you.
That is it's a very hard question. I think the one way to think about the criterion we've tended to use is, what are the books that have the feature that returning to them and engaging with them again and again and again is going to be incredibly intellectually productive. And I think we're fairly open-ended in what counts. So one thing about the two-semester sequence is we're coordinating, but we didn't come up with a kind of fixed curriculum. It's not like there's a list in which we've had to answer the question, what are the great books? It's more that what are books that are in conversation with each other and that students will find fruitful to engage with, professors will find fruitful to engage with, that will enable them to think deeply about how society should be structured, how life should be lived, what the role of technology in life and in society should be. But yeah, we have not tried to sort of pin down a canon more determinately than that.
Yeah, thank you, Linda, for that amazing question. This is Linda Rabia, who's one of MIT's amazing political philosophers. And I think when I think about that question, I think we have a Nobel Prize winning physicist, Sam Ting, and he once said that in physics, what is really important is having the best data possible. And kind of interpretations of the data, models of the data kind of come and go, but as long as you have the best data possible, that will stand the test of time. And I think that the way I think about great works is that there's material in there that people can continue to engage with in order to refine, again, their moral, intellectual, and artistic judgment. So it's through that process of engaging with this really rich material that enables us to sharpen our discernment and judgment, and that's what I think of. But of course, people should actually also ask Linda what she thinks of that question.
Michael, yeah.
Thank you all. This has been wonderful. I have a question, I guess, for both of you, more towards the Great Books program. I have spoken with many alumni, our older alumni from MIT, who took Great Books classes like this and really credited it as one of the fundamental distinguishing blocks of their MIT education, that it helped them stand out from other engineers who had only technical educations, and from colleagues from Harvard who had no technical education, but that they were able to have them both. How would you speak about what we're doing today, to that audience of alumni who really valued that part of their education? What is what you're doing today? How is it different and how is it similar? And I think I would ask the same on the campus. How is what you're doing today, how does it relate to that MIT tradition, and how does it bring it forward in a new way?
I mean, I do think it's a revival of that tradition. I think there are logistical ways in which it's different, which is that the broadening of students' ethical and social understanding right now is under the auspices of the SHASS requirement, and it's very dispersed. You can take all kinds of different things. And right now we're not thinking, well, we want to introduce requirements. But I do think the salience of these courses, the sort of the student demand for them is there, and I think they can be brought to recognize that these courses can play the kind of role they were playing at that earlier moment. And so I think there's continuity. I think there's probably a greater flexibility in understanding what the canon is. I think you just would read a more diverse range of culturally diverse, geographically diverse range of thinkers in a classics of Western philosophy course now than might have been true when people had more of a fixed curriculum. And I think there's probably more attentiveness on the pedagogical side to the difficulty of doing this. So I suspect that when people were teaching these courses in 1955 or 1970, there was a sense that students were prepared to read books like this. There wasn't there wasn't this crisis of attention. And so one way in which I think this has changed is that we do think of ourselves as not just imparting great ideas, but imparting skills of attention that I think students can then carry on into the world. And that is a new challenge that I think classes like this and like Compass can really help to address.
So I've been asked to keep the trains running on time. So, we'll have an opportunity at lunchtime to continue the conversation. But for right now, I'd like to thank Lily, Kieren, and Melissa for this wonderful.
Thank you.